About 66% of marital frustrations will never be resolved.
The bad news is, neither one of you are probably going to change all that much in these tendencies.
The less I receive from God, the more I demand of my wife.
Welcome to the Grace Marriage Podcast. I'm Brad Rhodes.
And I'm Marilyn Rhodes. We're here to help you build a marriage that's stronger, more connected, and full of grace.
I'm Rick Dayton, joining Brad and Marilyn as we bring you weekly conversations designed to inspire and equip you to live intentionally in your marriage.
We'll share practical tips, powerful stories, and strategies to help you and your spouse grow closer and thrive together.
So whether you're just starting out or have been married for years, there's always room to grow. Let's do this together. This is the Grace Marriage Podcast.
Welcome to the Grace Marriage Podcast. I'm here with a good friend and somebody that I've just thought a lot of for a long time. He's a best-selling author, wrote Sacred Marriage, a lot of other books. I recommend his books all the time. Recommended Sacred Search this week. And just a real gift. And not everybody gets the privilege of getting to know Gary Thomas like I do. But when you get to know Gary Thomas, he loves people. And he gives apparent when Meryl and I got to meet him that we connected. And it's just Gary, thanks for being on the show. And thanks for being such a good friend.
Well, thank you, Brad. I just look forward to any opportunity to get to talk with you.
Well, I think it goes both ways. And I'm just going to jump right in. I know you wrote the book Sacred Marriage. It's kind of become a modern classic. And this kind of the central idea was, what if God designed marriage to make us holy more than happy? How did you kind of come to that concept, and how has it impacted your marriage?
Yeah, well, I had written 3 books on Christian spiritual formation, how we become more like Christ. And I realized that what God was using more than prayer and fasting retreats or meditation on scripture or solitude or whatnot, frankly, was my marriage, to expose my sin, to give me an opportunity to grow in my sin, to grow in patience. Then you bring in kids and you can add on to that. And I'd never seen somebody address marriage from that perspective. And so I wanted to look at how God uses marriage to help shape us into the character of Christ. And part of it was my limitations. As you know, Brad, I'm not a marriage therapist. You interview people who have the psychology degrees, and with like Dr. Slattery, even the PhDs on that. But I was writing sort of as a spiritual director approach, as a pastor. How can we use our marriages to get to know God more and to grow to become more like Christ? And I think because of that, it just sort of took off. It led me to admit some things that I felt like Christian books that came out in 2000 up to that point had sort of downplayed. And I get this because, you've written a book on marriage too, and they want you to market it. And what is the gain from reading the book? And so I thought books were saying, well, read this book and every day of marriage will be like your honeymoon. You won't have any troubles. Every day will be fun. And I was willing to admit that I think even the best of marriages are going to have difficult seasons. And that honesty kind of took hold of people. But then to know the purpose behind the difficulty, to become more like Christ. And then how do we turn that into an act of worshiping our Heavenly Father? And so I just that's where the sacred came from. It's just putting marriage into a whole new light, what we expect from it, what we appreciate about it, what we think about it, and how we engage in it.
Yeah, and for us, like the book we wrote, The Grace Marriage, it's kind of like all about experiencing the grace of Jesus and applying it over. So you grow in grace through the extension of grace. You receive the grace of Jesus and extend it. How does that kind of apply in the sacred marriage concept?
Well, I found early on that the less I receive from God, the more I demand of my wife.
It's so good.
Back to 1 John 4:19, we love. Why? Because he first loved us. And for me to show grace to my wife, I have to receive grace. James 3:2 says we all stumble in many ways. And that word all is pretty powerful. I mean, in context, it's even talking about leaders, but certainly is relevant for everybody. there isn't an exception. The Bible is promising you will marry somebody who will stumble. And it says not just occasionally, but in many ways. And so, how do you keep loving someone and appreciating someone who stumbles in many ways? Well, you get that when you receive grace from God for us stumbling in many ways. And so, I've said in my Cherish conferences that I think we have to preach the gospel of grace to ourselves every day. Remind ourselves what we've been saved from, what we deserve, how God has treated us. And when I do that, I'm just far more likely to extend grace to my wife, my kids, my coworkers, even occasionally other drivers on I-70 or 25, although that's a little bit harder for me.
It's interesting because part of our marriage testimony was Marilyn came to me and said, Brett, I don't need you. And I was like, what? She goes, Christ is sufficient because he's enough for me. You can be at a point where you can't give me anything and I'll be fine. He said, because my beauty, and that's really what set our marriage free. We had some other things that made it much better, but it was really interesting that was the key is when we both stopped putting pressure on marriage to deliver something that it just wasn't delivering and probably couldn't deliver.
I do think, and others have written about this, that our expectations on marriage today are higher than they've ever been in history. And I'm not saying that historical marriages are all that good. I don't want to go back to some of them, but we expect our spouse to be our best friend, to love us like nobody else loves us, to be the best lover, to be a brother or sister in Christ, to be the best parent, to always be involved, always engaged in whatnot. And to a degree, a lot of those are legitimate expectations, but we expect all of them to be packaged together. And I think we often suffocate our marriages and bury them with those increased expectations. When we're receiving from the Lord and we're living by God's affirmation, then we're able to focus on giving to our spouse rather than having that love bucket filled up.
So good. We expect our spouse to be stable, but spontaneous and responsible, but fun. And then, hardworking, but willing to, it's really just, it creates this impossible. And then whatever our spouse is not, I find oftentimes that's what you focus on. Like he could be hardworking, he could be Christian, and man, he's just boring and not a romantic. He could be, if he's a romantic, man, he's just all over the place. He drives me crazy. It's just really interesting to see how it's so easy just to zero into your spouse's struggles, like you mentioned earlier in our podcast, and just dwell on those things. And scripture actually calls us to dwell on the opposite.
And Dr. John Gottman points out that about 66% of marital frustrations will never be resolved. And so if you don't apply grace, you're going to be 2/3 frustrated in your marriage. Because look, this is a sweet season for Lisa and May. We just got to spend some time with the grandkids. Then I spoke in Florida, so we got to spend some time at the beach. And you think, how can you not be happy on the beach? Well, the challenge with Lisa and I is we're probably never less compatible than we are on vacation. Because Lisa likes to do 8 to 10 things a day on vacation. And I like to do 0 to 1 things a day on vacation. So we usually compromise at about 8 or 9. But on one of the last days there, we're finally walking back. We've been on the beach, and it's right outside a restaurant. The hotel had these nice hammocks out, and there was a band playing covers and said, hey, let's go hit the hammocks. And we were there 8 minutes later. I'm just starting to settle back. Lisa goes, oh, I can't take this anymore. I got to get up. I said, honey, it's been 8 minutes. And she goes, well, it feels like I've been in prison for 20 years. And here's the thing, but that's never going to fully change as far as me not wanting to pack every vacation day and her wanting to. But in another regard, that's such a small slice of our marriage. We should take more vacations than we do, and not to define your marriage by the small slice, but to remember the wonder that Lisa is to me by all the other things where I would be helpless and just about lost without her in so many practical ways, not to mention the emotional loss and whatnot. And so it's not defining your marriage by where you're different or where you frustrate each other, but by showing grace so that you can appreciate what you do have together.
It's so good. And back to your very first question was it just calls you to consider the interest of others above yourself. It causes you to be selfless, not selfish. And till Lisa, I get her. I mean, that's me. I mean, I'm like, do. And I remember one time I was getting a massage and the therapist said, I'm just going to put this under your head and I'll be back in 10 minutes. I thought she'd forgotten about me. I thought it'd be like an hour. I thought I was getting ready to get up and I got ready again. And then she came in. She goes, it's been 10 minutes. And it was like, but I get it. Like to her, to me, it felt like, and it's just a call to me to be still and, know that he's Lord. But our different interests actually call us to selflessness. If Marilyn loves sporting events and she loved doing what I love to do, I wouldn't have to be selfless. But she likes Broadway plays, which I think are boring. She likes symphony. She likes art. She likes looking at flowers. All of it, which is somewhat painful to me, but it's good. It's good for me.
That hey, they've got a great bush gardens or other gardens. Whenever you have anything in front of gardens, it's like, okay, I'll bless you, but
Oh, but you find it seems like spouses marry people so vastly different from them. Like Marilyn's more of a spender. I'm more of a saver. Marilyn's gentle. I'm not gentle. And we were enamored by each other until we got married. And 6 months later, she couldn't stand the sight of me. Why do you
yes.
think it is that so many people end up marrying people so different than them? And shortly into the marriage, they're really struggling.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've found, and this is anecdotal, I'm not based off of real research, but when I'll often poll couples, I found about 80% of people feel like they married their opposite. And one neurologist was explaining it that when you're dating, differences create attraction. It's kind of fun to visit something different. And so it creates interest, it provides a spark. But then when you get married, the differences often become a point of contention. So the very thing that draws you into marriage is what may drive you into marital counseling. But just to recognize that sometimes it's better for kids to be raised by people who have different strengths and the marriage works better. For one, I mean, one of the things that they talk about is whether you're pleasing or not. And I'm a pleaser off the charts. If I buy something, I'm going to buy it. I'm not going to return it. I'm just going to say, I don't want to offend this person by returning or whatnot. Lisa is low on the pleasing scale. She returns everything that I don't want to return. She doesn't care. I mean, she just is a master at that. And so little things like that where we're so different um, actually can help serve the relationship and the family when you add kids into the mix.
Well, think if you were married to like my wife, Marilyn, like my wife, Marilyn can't go by a vendor at the mall that's trying to get your attention without stopping because she feels terrible for my daughter who got it from my wife called me and said, Dad, you'd be proud of me. I walked by a stand in the mall without talking to the guy.
Yeah.
It's like, but yeah, I get it. It's interesting. And you just have to learn to love each other as you are, because for me, Marilyn's pleaser side was really annoying. I mean, she would tip the plumber. We got a $350 bill and she'd tip $50. I'm like, babe, they billed that in. But it was, it's really called me to a new place and into parenting. I mean, we conflicted at first over parenting because I'm really more laid back parent and just kind of Marilyn's very detailed, disciplined, diet, all those things. And she'd get frustrated saying, Brad, you actually have to parent. And I'd be like, if you didn't do all these things, the kid would be just fine. She'd be devalued. I mean, we were able to make it work, but how would you advise couples? Because I find parenting is a major source of marital strife. And usually one of them thinks the other's too harsh or too calm.
Yeah. Well, I think a good dose of humility is helpful. If we just get away from the my way is the best way or the only way. And it's hard because when it comes to parenting, most people think their way really is not even the best way, but the only way you should do it. But recognize that God can use differences to help the child. Now, there's some issues where you have to throw down. I mean, I think there are some issues of marriage where or parenting, I should say, where you need to both be strong on that and whatnot. I mean, there's some things it's not healthy for kids to be eating a bunch of junk food instead of their dinners, or to have unwatched access to all forms of the internet at all time. And so uh, there are certain things where I would say, yeah, we need to agree on these boundaries, but also recognize we just bring different things to parenting. And I noticed as our kids got older, some of them would come to Lisa for certain things and to me for certain things. And it's just acceptable. Like, I have a daughter who had a federal government job that she just loved, but was one of those jobs that was going to lose over the recent realignment. So she's talking over with me about different other vocational opportunities. And she said, hey, I want to talk to Dad about that. If it's anything health related or food related, she's going to talk to my wife. And again, it's I recognize Lisa has expertise in areas. Maybe I have expertise in other areas, and just respecting that. And I think it's fine alone for husband and wife to deal with it. Hey, I really think you're too hard on him, or I think, you're too soft. But those are usually best done in private so that you're not creating a divided front in front of the kids.
Yeah, and a big shift for us was Meryl started focusing on the positives in my parenting. Like, I'm glad you're fun. I'm glad you're spontaneous. Our kids feel well loved. Their kids feel delighted in. When her focus shifted from, you don't parent enough, you're not disciplined enough, you don't support me enough. Once her mind shifted to that, it actually helped me want to honor her more in the other things. It's like, you know, when she would look me in the eye and tell me, I think you're a great dad, and I really feel she thinks I'm a great dad, then she's calling me into things that are uncomfortable. That's a lot easier than when she said, I think you're being a bad dad and I wish you'd be a better dad. So
Brad, I've talked to a number of couples where one or the other, and it's usually the guy, and this isn't an excuse. Guys shouldn't respond this way. But when the mom is very negative toward the dad's parenting, they just quit. They say, I can't please her. And so they become the scratch golfer. They get the first buck. They're rebuilding the car in the garage. And after they get out of it, they realize, no, that was wrong. That was passive. I, I, I should not have gone that route. But then the wives will even admit, well, I understand why he didn't want to be at home. I made home a very unpleasant place for him to be. So I'm not defending either the husband or the wife in that situation, just recognizing that dynamic where you're over flooding someone with negativity. For some people, it just causes them to stop even trying.
yeah, people do better when they feel like they're succeeding. And that's one thing Marilyn's done really well with me is she really focuses on my good. It's kind of weird because like nobody knows my bad like Marilyn. And I mean, to your point about change, we don't change all that much. I mean, we change some, but I mean, I've told people in counseling before, it's like the bad news is, neither one of you are probably going to change all that much in these tendencies. The good news is you can have an amazing marriage. So, but it's amazing when she knows all the bad and she looks at me in a way that nobody else looks at me. I mean, it's special. And I think that's the opportunity of grace we have in marriage that, man, I know you completely and I think you're amazing. So
Well, I think this going full circle brings us back to grace. I do think that Lisa would say in 40 years of marriage, I've changed a good bit. Um, and maybe because I was just so immature and selfish when we first got married, it's easier to just kind of become average and there's good change. But for me, Brad, again, it all comes back to worship. And I would just say, even a couple days ago, God just makes me so sensitive to how I speak to his daughter, how I treat his daughter, even how I think about his daughter. And having received grace from God, um, it I'd say 90% of the changes I made in my marriage is being convicted by God. Hey, Gary, that's my daughter. I expect you to treat her accordingly. Um, and so he keeps my heart soft toward her. He gives me his heart for her, because here's the reality. God knows more of my wife's faults than I do. but he loves her more than I'm able to love her. So the more I get to know God, the more he gives me his heart for her. And to get to that point, and this is the challenge for some of your listeners, I have to receive that God is also very pro me. If God is for me, who can be against me? Ephesians 5:1, I'm a dearly loved child. And when I understand that God can love the imperfect me and receive that grace, then I can give the grace to love my imperfect spouse.
Well, that is so good. And when you're around somebody, you become like who you're around to some degree. Bad company corrupts good character. My wife has tremendously good character. I'm more gentle. I'm more kind. I'm more thoughtful. I catch myself like worrying about other people in ways I think I would have never even had that thought if God hadn't put Marilyn in my life. I mean, that would have never touched my Doppler pre-Maryland, and now it's like, ooh, I don't want to hurt their feelings. Oh, I don't want to do this. Wait a minute, that's not me, but it is. But God's used Maryland to create a better me. So yeah, you're so right. We do. It's amazing. I think people underrate the power of marriage as it relates to character development. Would you agree with that?
I do, if we value it. But the thing is, I don't think most of us value it because, speaking from the Protestant tradition, we know we're saved by grace through faith. We don't have to become holier to get into heaven. We're into heaven because of what Jesus did on our behalf. But I don't practice holiness to get into heaven. I want to practice holiness so that my wife's life doesn't feel like hell, because she will bear the brunt of my sin more than anyone else. And there are so many scriptures, 2 Corinthians 7, dear friends, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates body and spirit, acting holiness out of reverence for God. Or 2 Peter 1 that says, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and the goodness knowledge, self-control, and goes on and lists the virtues. There's so many virtues verses, that urge us to continue to grow in righteousness. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. That's present tense in the Greek. And so I think we take this passive approach to spiritual growth. But the reality is, if we want to improve our marriages, we need to become what Paul calls us to become, to purify ourselves, to seek first his righteousness, to make every effort to add to our faith. And the more I do that, I'm dying to the things that will push a woman away. Colossians 3 lists some of those: anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language, and lying. Earlier, it mentions sexual immorality. And then righteousness isn't just what we avoid, it's what we add. In Colossians 3, it would be listed as compassion, kindness, gentleness, patience, and love. If you replace sexual immorality, anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language, and lying with compassion, kindness, gentleness, patience, and love, you will have an entirely different marriage. And so
That's so
what
good.
I wrote in Sacred Marriage is that while I think marital skills are helpful, communication, resolving conflict, handling finances, and all of that, if we would grow in righteousness, will lift up our marriages as much as anything else will lift up our marriages, especially if we add worship. And I think if you add worship to your marriage and growth in righteousness, you're on your way not just to a sacred marriage, but to a very happy marriage.
Well, that is so good. And if you haven't read Sacred Marriage, I highly commend you to purchase it and get it. And Gary, what are some recent resources that you've put out that could encourage people in their walks with the Lord and their pursuit of their bride or husband?
Well, the last book I wrote on marriage is called Making Your Marriage a Fortress. And where people have found that helpful is that I'd written a number of books on marriage, and in Making Your Marriage a Fortress, I interviewed other couples. I said, look, I've said what I could say. And these are couples, wise couples who went through difficult things. One, a devastating medical diagnosis for the husband. And things aren't devastating, but how do you stay close when you have 4 little kids that seem to be pulling you apart? One couple lost their child. One couple had devastating financial issues. There was an affair by the woman in one story, affair by the husband in another story, losing a child, all of these things. And I asked them, what did you learn? What did you do wrong? What did you do right? And what would you tell other couples? And so I think it was just telling the story of what wise couples have went through and how so many things that have pulled couples under, actually, they came out of it stronger in their marriages, and what they can teach us about that.
That's awesome. So make your marriage a fortress and make sure you read Sacred Marriage. And at Grace Marriage, our big stick is invest in your marriage. And the way you do that is get a marriage book, read the marriage book, continue to learn, grow in skill, keep your marriage front of mind. And if you're in a Grace Marriage groups, show up every single time. If your church doesn't have a marriage ministry, bring Grace Marriage to your church. We're longing for churches to invest in marriage, people to invest in marriage, and to see God get glory of marriage. So, Gary, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And more than that, it's an honor being your friend.
Thank you, Brad. I love what you do. And let me just underline what you just said to the listeners, because there's so many ministries that focus on marriages in crisis. What the church has been lacking are the ministries that seek to grow marriages. Instead of heal marriages, they're seeking to help them grow stronger even when they're not in crisis. So Grace fills just an enormous hole in the church. And just as a pastor, I'm particularly grateful for what you do.
Thank you so much. You have a blessed day.
Thank you for joining us on the Grace Marriage Podcast. We really hope you're feeling inspired to take intentional steps to grow in your marriage.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Your support helps us spread the message of grace and reach even more couples.
And if you have a moment, please leave us a review. Your feedback means a lot to us and helps others discover the podcast. To learn more about how you can grow in your marriage, visit us at gracemarriage.com. Keep building stronger, grace-filled marriages.
We'll see you next week on the Grace Marriage Podcast. Until then, keep growing in grace.